I've changed you to meeting host, so you should be able to put your. There we go. Sorry, getting foiled by the default Zoom settings.
Oh, Zoom is a fickle master to us all.
Consistently change. They seem every week as like a new setting which comes up. And like, I wasn't there last week, I'm sure. But I hope everyone's doing well. Erik, whereabouts are you joining us from in the world?
Sure, I'm in Portland, Oregon, so on the West Coast.
Amazing. And hi to everybody joining. As per usual, if anybody has any questions throughout this discussion, then make sure you leave them either in the chat or in the Q&A tab. We'll make sure we pick those up. I'm just going to close a few windows down and mute my notifications. Put my phone on Do Not Disturb, as that has a wonderful way of joining my headphones and switching everything off. So I learned all that on the hard way. Cool. Well, Erik, thank you very much for joining us and generously lending us your time. We really appreciate it. Yeah, and excited for this discussion.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Okay, so let's kick things off. Erik, would you be able to give us the 101 on yourself, quick version, and then we're going to dive into the meaty stuff. So this is going to be a fireside chat. So I've got lots of stuff that I want to ask and probe into based around growing and scaling communities, which Erik is nothing short of a master of, going back many years in various different capacities and contexts, which we're going to get to in a minute. So yeah, Erik, if you can give us the lowdown just to kick things off, that would be great.
Yeah, totally. So let's see. So yeah, I grew up in North Carolina. I was a liberal arts major in school. Started sort of my career as a filmmaker, doing documentary films, independent films, different video projects, and then quickly realized, like, okay, how do you get people to see those? So got into sort of the marketing of independent films, things without a budget. Moved to New York, started working in independent film and music. Did a lot of again, things without a budget. So that's how I kind of got involved in online communities at first, and sort of it was just the early stages of sort of social media. So if you didn't have a budget and you were promoting a amazing Korean thriller, you went and found where people who liked other Korean thrillers hung out, which was all kinds of message boards and blogs and YouTube channels. So that's kind of how I got involved. Was the fifth employee at Reddit. Was the first community manager there. So joined Reddit in 2008. And then, worked at Reddit for the next 6 years, kind of moving up, and eventually became general manager. And so back then Reddit had a really small team, still has a relatively small team, but there was about, I think, 70, 80 people when I left, but oversaw basically most everything that wasn't product for the last couple of years. After Reddit, I helped launch Depop in the US. If you're not familiar with Depop, it's a sort of mobile Gen Z eBay where you can really follow. It's more about the people you follow than the items. Love Depop. It was really fun to sort of launch that in the US. It had already kind of gotten big in the UK and Italy. And then moved to WeWork. I got to work on sort of the holy grail in the community space, which is online, offline. I'm more skeptical of online, offline intersections than I was before, but worked on that. That was super interesting for about 2 years. Then I went on to Airtime, which was in its like 5th or 4th life at the time. Sean Parker's sort of social video chat app, group video product. Did that for a little bit. Then I went to Nike, where I was an entrepreneur in residence. And that's where I actually started using MakerPad. I mean, I guess it was still pretty early days of MakerPad, but I was kind of working internally at Nike, launching sort of unbranded MVPs, sort of to test out new business models, new sort of digital offerings. So got to experiment a lot, try a bunch of stuff sort of quietly in the market, and used a lot of no code stuff. So really indebted forever to MakerPad for helping me figure out how the hell to do that. Did that for a year at Nike, and then after that joined Teal, which was founded by my old boss at WeWork, Dave Fano, who's a sort of calls himself a recovering architect. And we had always sort of, when we worked together, talked about careers and, I don't know, what does career growth look like? What responsibility or role do companies have? What do individuals do to sort of learn and network and figure out what they want to do in their life, no matter if they're, you know, in their first job or their 10th. And so, yeah, that's kind of the idea for Teal. It's a platform, a community for people who are interested in career growth. Definitely help people find jobs, especially in this post-pandemic climate. But you know, we hope eventually it's a community and a platform, a suite of tools and infrastructure that'll last people sort of from first job to the last. So yeah, it's a pretty small team, about 10 people, and I run all the community stuff. So get to experiment with you know, both a free and then a paid you know, sort of member community.
Absolutely, that's really interesting variety of businesses, not only just from like types, like you mentioned, online to offline, but also varying like business models. So in relation to communities specifically, how did those communities, maybe starting all the way back at Reddit, because obviously that is the hub and main like discussion point of the internet, which form around even the most niche communities, how did your experience in building such communities change over time from starting at Reddit all the way through to where you are now at Teal? So could you maybe touch on each of those communities and what are the differences in between each one?
Sure. And just to add another sort of layer of variables, also been lucky to work with different sort of target audiences. So, you know, for example, Reddit skewed, I don't know, at the time, maybe 60-40 male, 70-30 male. Depop was like 80-90% female, and very Gen Z. At Nike, I was actually focused on older adults, so 50 and up, baby boomers. So been super, you know, fortunate to work with a variety of target audiences too, which I actually think those were there was the least difference there. You know, humans sort of behave very similar across sort of demographic categories at least. But yeah, I mean, Reddit is interesting. In the early days of Reddit, and this is even, you know, post-acquisition in after the first few years, the thinking was, you know, Reddit worked really well for this initial community of sort of programmers and, you know, people that followed Paul Graham on his blog and, you know, were interested in video games and this sort of stuff. But we needed a different identity, a different brand, if we wanted to move into other categories. So actually some of the first stuff I did when I joined Reddit was creating different verticals. There was one for sports, there was one for sort of gossip, you know, Hollywood entertainment news, and they had same sort of technology, but different names, different branding. Like it wasn't even obvious it was Reddit because we thought, okay, this is for a different audience. And I think that's always, I don't know, it's always interesting to watch other communities as they try to grow and see, like, do they focus on sort of a larger breadth of topics for the original audience, or a sort of more similar interaction, but for a brand new audience, for a brand new topic, which I don't think there's a right answer. It's just interesting to watch other people try to navigate that, you know, I guess, crossing the chasm. But we were wrong. It turned out those sort of, you know, new Reddits for new verticals didn't really work. What did work was sort of slowly expanding the Reddit community and letting it grow organically, and then also being able to work with existing communities that were sort of growing on their own. So I would say there's sort of two, you know, at Reddit, the growth was really powered by two, you know, sort of trends or patterns. One was, you know, communities outside of Reddit that were growing because of, you know, whatever. So that's, you know, I remember that, you know, I remember at the time, you know, dubstep was this new music genre that, you know, I don't necessarily care for taste-wise, but like it was becoming a thing, and there was no home for that for people who were into dubstep elsewhere, and I don't know, the sort of music world. So the, you know, the dubstep community on Reddit kind of was able to grow with that trend. Or, you know, something like, you know, League of Legends, right? League of Legends, it sort of took a few years before there was tournaments and sites and bloggers and streamers who were dedicated to League of Legends. League of Legends was able to sort of grow in those early years, and the subreddit and subreddits around League of Legends were able to sort of grow with it. I mean, that's a nice thing about the Reddit platform, is you can start a subreddit, start a community, and sort of evolve it as the audience, as the community grows, add more complexity, all those sorts of things. So those were, that was kind of one area that fueled growth at Reddit, was being able to really support these emerging communities, niche, trends. Same with, as Reddit expanded beyond the US and beyond sort of, English speaking world, that was another way that Reddit was able to grow. It's like, okay, Reddit works really well. You start with a small community in, Iceland or, wherever, and it's able to sort of grow as it becomes more popular locally. The other one was sort of internal community. So, when I was at Reddit, I think there was something like several hundred subreddits created each day. And most of them, I mean, some of them were probably created by accident, because Reddit wasn't the easiest platform to figure out. But even the ones that were created with the intent of starting a new community, most of them, died off after a few days or weeks. Only a small percentage lasted after a few months, but you were able to really get this sort of survival of the fittest in terms of the sort of rhetorical format, the brand of the subreddit. So I think about something like there's this community called No Sleep that was original sort of horror writing, kind of young adult, a lot of it first person, where people told like scary stories that they shared their writing. And so that sort of the brand of that subreddit, from the name to the way they styled the CSS, just with the type of things they did in the community, it was able to really build this organic community of mostly young sort of horror, spooky story writers, and was able to sort of grow into its own thing and grow internally at Reddit, but then really start to bring in a new audience. So that's another type of growth we had, is these sort of they weren't just subreddits that were categories or topics. They were almost their own type of experience or type of interaction that were new, or it was such a I guess the biggest example there is the Ask Me Anything sort of format that didn't originate on Reddit, but definitely popularized there. So the I Am a subreddit was able to really grow, and was bringing in kind of celebrities and amazing extraordinary people who weren't celebrities, and really grow an audience there. But that sort of rhetorical format was able to sort of bring new people in. But there are a lot of smaller ones as well. So that was pretty big at Reddit, and Reddit was definitely in that sort of traditional pyramid of engagement, where you have 90% of the people lurking, 9% commenting and voting, and 1% who are really creating the content. So that Reddit definitely was fit that sort of rule of thumb you see a lot in terms of content, user-generated content communities. The other thing we saw, so going back to the sort of failed idea of having different Reddits for different audiences, the thing I definitely learned at Reddit is that people, it's not like like a newspaper, or like, even television, where you want your sort of categories of information separated. People want to see, cute puppy pictures, or their favorite sports or video game or TV discussion next to hard news, next to something local, next to something they care about, and they don't mind that it's all sort of jumbled up in one chaotic mess of a UI, and they don't mind sort of jumping around. I think that seems obvious now, but at the time it wasn't, at least to me. So that was interesting. Depop was, I don't know, Depop was what got me excited about Depop and really any community was, it was clear people were taking the very simple format. Depop is basically Instagram with a buy button, and they were being creative with the format. So similar to Reddit, very different audience, as I mentioned before, different sort of business model. Depop's a marketplace. I think they still take like a 10% cut, but that's how they make their money. There's no ads. And originally people, it was just, you couldn't post anything on Depop that didn't have a buy button, right? Didn't have a price on it. But already, even in the early days when I joined, users were starting to do really creative things like, they would post about, oh, my, I don't know, my boyfriend lives, in a different city, and I need to kind of come up with a few $100s to buy a plane ticket or train ticket to go see him for his birthday. So I'm selling a bunch of stuff in my closet. So they would make like sort of almost like a blog post or, Instagram post about that situation in their lives, using the infrastructure that the product created to let them sell things. So, they put some pictures of their boyfriend and, all the stuff in their closet they were going to be selling over the next week, and, a map showing the distance between the two cities, and the price, the price would be like, whatever, $9,999, or it'd be like $666. So users were being really creative with the format. Another thing you see, and this goes back to eBay, is you see people doing meet the seller posts where they're talking about themselves, kind of introducing themselves to their followers. Again, they're using something that was originally created for commerce, but they're using it in a more social way. So that's what really excited me about Depop. And you saw the same thing with Reddit. Like, Reddit originally was just a link aggregator. There were no comments. You couldn't do text posts. You couldn't do, photo or video posts. I think one of the really interesting things that happened at Reddit was when users started to kind of hack the framework to do text posts. And it was really complicated. Like, you created some text at Pastebin, and you basically had to guess the URL structure of the next, and sort of guess what number the next Reddit post would be, which was possible if you were fast enough, because Reddit wasn't that high traffic yet. But anyway, users were they were invested enough in the platform. They were like, I want to be able to do this, and the platform's, not letting me, so I'm going to figure something out. And I think that's when I get really excited when I look at a product or a community, is like, are users able to sort of create these off-label, sort of features? And I think, companies and teams that have been successful are able to, bake most of those sort of off-label use cases back into the product. So that, and you say like, okay, if people are doing this and it's really complicated and hard, and you have to know CSS enough to sort of hack it, then, what if we made it an actual product feature and reduced the friction even more? So
yeah, can I just jump in just as like a side note to that? When you see something like that happening, maybe you're working in like growing a fledgling community, and then people are starting to post things themselves and get creative with the platform, like you mentioned, as the like community owner who's responsible for like the overall like direction and growth of the community, how do you like navigate that? That's something you encourage, or do you end up like building the feature because the community requested it, or do you try and push the community like down a certain route? And the side note to that is about, I guess, how you control like community sprawl when it starts to go off in directions either one, you didn't expect, or two, you don't want.
Yeah. So I think for the most, I think like 9 out of 10 times, it's the right thing to do to sort of follow where the community is leading. That the community, if you have a community that's engaged enough and feels invested enough to sort of spend time and ideas and try to make something work, even if it's not explicitly, what they're told to do in a space, that's a good sign. And that's sort of like, paving the cow paths or whatever metaphor you want to use, as far as evolving a product. And it is a little scary because you're sort of not in control. But I think once it was pretty apparent to me earlier on that I was not smarter than the community, that any of the communities I work with. That collectively, they were much, much smarter than any number of people who worked at the company were. Just by definition, if you've got a sort of engaged community, that should be the case. Now you have to be able to sort of have a longer term vision and sort of broaden a perspective that you recognize those 1 out of 10 times when it doesn't make sense, and those are tricky calls to make. But I think most times it's worth it to at least encourage people creating something, even if you're not exactly sure where it'll go in terms of like off-label features and things like that. In terms of, I mean, I think a lot of what, especially when you're at a smaller size, a lot of the sort of community management at that level is the sort of stories you tell internally. So showcasing, hey, this user did something really creative to make this thing possible that, we didn't even think was possible or think people would want to do. It's really awesome. We're highlighting it, which is good because it rewards that user, but it also shows people that, hey, we're listening, we're here, and we'll support, creative projects or creative events or whatever the interesting stories that happen on the platform. And I think that has a real ripple effect. It's sort of behavior modeling. So people are like, oh, that's cool. Maybe this idea I've been sort of playing around with, or this thing I've been thinking about isn't so stupid after all. I'm going to try it.
Definitely.
So I think a lot of it comes down to what, encouraging the type of behavior you want and those types of creative expression to sort of generate more, and also just encouraging the actual users who are, that 1% that's, the super users on the platform.
Got it. And is that something that you've tried to encourage at Teal? Was this like sort of like an early-ish strategy? And if you could probably like expand on what the initial phase of joining Teal looked like for you. I appreciate you've joined in like a very turbulent time, so it may be different compared to what you do in, say, a year prior to a pandemic in 2020. But let's say, for instance, we have people building our communities here and they're likely at like an early stage. Maybe they've got some like initial users. Let's imagine that's a few hundred. Let's just say for use case, people could be obviously prior to this stage, but say you get to a few hundred users, you got like a little bit of a super user type community. And how did you take that on from the stage at which Teal was at when you joined to where you are now, based off of the lessons you've learned through prior positions?
Yeah. So I mean, I joined Teal like before it had a name, sort of right at the very beginning. So it really changed, post-pandemic, sort of before the pandemic. I mean, the sort of long-term vision has always been the same, to sort of help people with career growth, and we knew community would be a part of that. But I think after the pandemic, people got a lot more open about talking about, just even talking with other people, even in a private community, that they were unemployed or that they were furloughed or that they thought layoffs were coming or whatever. People were, there's still a lot of stigma around that, but there's even more before all the layoffs due to COVID. So that had a big impact on on everything. And we sort of, really wanted to help people who had been laid off due to the pandemic. So we sort of like, made all of our tools and resources and programming free for a while after the, basically all spring and summer. To sort of build, to sort of help however we could, and also, it made sense sort of for the community and sort of grow our user base. I think, I mean, at that size, you are able to have sort of a more intimate relationship with the sort of super users and members of the community. You're able to actually like interact with them directly on DMs or whatever. Or hold small events. We basically had, I think between the beginning of June and the beginning of October, we basically held like more than one live Zoom event a day for our community. Sometimes it was super specific around like, resume customization. Sometimes it was more general sort of networking or interview practice, sort of mock interview practice with each other. But, I think the key to community, just, which is the same online and offline, is like, people get to know each other after sort of repeated interactions. You don't become best friends right away. It takes a while. If you remember the movie Step Brothers, I always think about that.
One of my
they
favorites.
become best friends in the first scene. It took the whole movie, right? So I think that's the same case when there are people in the community, they interact on Slack, then they're at a Zoom event together, then 2 weeks later, they're at another Zoom event. Then they feel comfortable enough where one is able to ask the other one for help. So especially in our community, it's sort of has a mutual aid and peer support element that, people aren't going to be comfortable doing that on the very first interaction. They need to get to know each other. So I think early on, the key is just that sort of repetition and, really making sure you're doing, doing things that don't scale by having a lot of, smaller intimate events over and over again, interacting directly with members, with users in your community who are invested. And then, you'll eventually reach a critical mass where you can't logistically do that anymore. But early on, that's the most powerful leverage you have.
And how are you approaching like just community activation generally? You touched on it there about doing like multiple events and making your materials free at the start. How are you thinking about your long-term like activation strategy from now? Because obviously the climate has shifted to more online, where I guess, let's say from previous projects, let's say like Nike, for example, or I don't know what it was like at Airtime, but different like activation strategies are viable in different times. So now, obviously, you're thinking about more online stuff. Is there any creative thinking that you guys have been doing at Teal about how to activate your community online? Not just for the people attending here, but let's say most events are going to Zoom. How are you thinking about one, like avoiding things like Zoom fatigue, but also creating things that are one, like meaningful for your communities in a way that they'll share and help like self-perpetuate and grow the community, but like not in like a growth hacky way, but like growing your community in like a genuine way that brings value to people without like spamming people, without like overdoing one content type. It sounds it's quite a delicate balance to try and hit.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's hard, and I think maybe our audience is a little bit different with Zoom fatigue, because whether they're employed or unemployed, a lot of them know they're gonna, get their next job over Zoom, and so there is an element of attending Zoom events is almost a form of practice, or at least comfort, right? You want to get comfortable talking to the webcam lens and all that kind of stuff, which I think can make a difference. So that's part of it. One thing we've done that's actually ongoing right now that's been super fun as far as activation has been a 30-day challenge. Something I've been obsessed with for a while. I know you all have done these sort of multi-day sort of challenges. It's a very like powerful grassroots concept. It's only been around like 10 years. No one really owns it, but everyone sort of knows what it is, for a large enough amount of people know what it is. So we're doing I think like day 18 of a 30-day career challenge where people get a task each day. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's more sort of a little bit more difficult, updating your resume or something like that. But that's been really great. We have sort of weekly check-in Zooms, and then on our Slack, we have a pretty big Slack community of like 3,000 people. There's a channel there where people check in on and sort of share the daily tasks they're doing. And I think the value for the users is the sort of accountability, right? So they know even if there's only a couple hundred people who are sort of participating, they kind of establish that ritual of sharing. Okay, day 13, I listed my 10 dream companies I want to work for one day, and I'm sharing it here in a very like public but safe way. I'm not broadcasting on Twitter. It's in this sort of private Slack channel. And that habit is very, I think, rewarding to people who participate, and they get to know each other as well and encourage each other. So I think it's those type of challenges that I know MakerPad does well too is a great way to sort of activate people, and give them a lot of value and a great experience without being too markety or growth hacky. But it's an event that we can talk about and is interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. We found it's a good way for people to kind of almost just get on the same page, because we found that people are always working on things. Let's say joining the MakerPad community, it's like they're working on their own projects, but not like out of sync with each other, but they're just doing their own thing, even though there'll be like certain crossover. So joining something like a challenge, I'm sure you see it like the career challenge that you're doing, is then they're like immediately on the same page. They know they're at the same stage, and then maybe they discuss what they're working on or discuss like shared issues, etc. So I think that's a really, really good point you just made. Jackson had a question. He said, hi, following up on the challenges of bringing Reddit users to another website, do you think it's easier now? There's a popular narrative now that Reddit's getting unbundled. Do you agree?
I don't know. I mean, I think, Reddit's like a house or a building that's lasted a few earthquakes. It's like, okay, it's still standing. So something in the foundation and the structure, whatever, is solid. I don't know. I mean, people have been talking about unbundling Craigslist for a decade. People have been talking about unbundling Wikipedia. I definitely think, there's a lot, like, you can look at a lot of stuff happening on Discord as being like, oh, those type of discussions used to happen on Reddit. They've moved to a different medium and a different sort of communication format. It's not exactly the same animal as Reddit, but I think there are certainly things like that, or even Twitch. There's, that's especially around some of the, the different gaming topics. I don't know. I think it's, I think as long as, to the 2 points I brought up earlier about Reddit's growth, as long as there's sort of new subreddits that are either about a new, sort of external organic trend, I think Reddit's still a really good place for that, because you don't have to, if there's a new, let's say there's a new diet, it's, not gluten-free, it's not paleo or keto, it's whatever the hell we're supposed to be eating or not eating next, right? As that thing is emerging, it doesn't make sense to build a standalone community just for that. It doesn't make sense to, start a blog or website that's dedicated to people who are followers of that dietary cult, because it's not big enough yet. So you start it on Reddit, it kind of grows with the trend. So I think as long as Reddit I think Reddit has an advantage, because people are going back there to learn about and participate in other communities. It's a really fertile place for those sort of new communities to grow. So I think as long as that's the case, it's hard to unbundle it.
Gotcha. Question from Alex as well. He says, any insights on balancing the desire to do a lot of live events and community-driven content versus bombarding people with too much / taking too much of their time?
Yeah, I think offering, sort of, I mean, there's some basic stuff. Offering recordings of live events is great. That way, there is something live. You still get that sort of magic of a live event, but people can't make it, especially if you have a community that's spread across different time zones. And we have we have members that are unemployed and have free time, and members that are employed and super busy and don't have free time. So I think that's one way that is pretty obvious but helps. And then I think really figuring out what those sort of rituals are, so that people can sort of so that you may be doing fewer events or fewer sort of activities that require sort of a synchronous presence, but people are really excited about them. So a lot, internal marketing around those things is important, because people sort of being funneled into the same event that's happening in the same sort of time and digital space. That's part of what makes it worthwhile. So I think most places, I mean most things I've been involved in, most projects I've worked on, we could definitely do more sort of internal marketing of those things to sort of gin up excitement and make sure everyone knows about it. I think there's a lot of value in that, and I don't know, those things always get deprioritized because we're startups and busy and trying to do a bunch of things. But I think like that's something that doesn't just make sure you get good turnout, but actually like contributes to the value of the event.
Got it. In terms of, let's talk about just a couple of like tactics for a minute. Let's imagine a situation where you've got your initial couple of handfuls of super users who are either from friends or family or natural social network who you've discussed building a community with and they've joined. What are some tactics that you use to get the people who initially bought into your community to bring other people into that community? Is there, rather than just the hope that somebody will talk about it if you provide enough good stuff, which I think is something you should do by default. How do you approach, say, that particular ask, or create a mechanism for that to happen? Is there a set number of tactics that you'd use?
Um, I don't know about a set number. I mean, I think it depends a little on the medium and the sort of animating topic. I think, obviously word of mouth and referrals are the most powerful mechanism, and anything that encourages those is, probably a high probability tactic. And I think, you can, there's a lot of power, especially with those early users that you developed a relationship with, that you provided a lot of value to, and maybe even over delivered in a sense, because the community is small. I think, just asking people goes a long way. Whether that's just sort of repeatedly in sort of digital communications, or just saying, hey, if, we're a small community, we're a small startup, we're a small project, whatever. If you know someone who would benefit, we'd love it. It'd mean a lot. It would help us. It would help you if, we grew this community a little bit, and invite them in. I think there's a few reasons that's super powerful. One is the people joining, they just get a different value prop. They get a different level of sort of trust if it's coming from a friend. And especially if it's in sort of an organic way, like you don't want to over optimize those initial referrals with too many sort of growthy tactics, I think, because it might be slightly more efficient. You might get slightly more analytics, but it's losing that sort of human appeal a little bit. The other thing is you can see how, I'm always interested in, how do people talk to their friends organically, whether it's, in person or on Twitter or whatever. How do they talk about something they value? What language do they use? How do they sort of sell it? How do they describe who it's for, who it's not for? And you can learn a lot from that, right? Like, it was interesting for us to watch, how did people talk about Teal when they talked about it on LinkedIn? Did they talk about it at all? Like the idea, this, early on, you're not sure, like, are people going to feel comfortable? Do they, like the brand? Are they satisfied enough that they're going to talk about it at all? So I think that's really important. And I wouldn't, you want to encourage it in a very sort of like sincere human way. And then you can sort of, optimize and operationalize that later on. But I think early on, that's really key.
Gotcha. Was some of the things that surprised you at Teal compared to things that you worked on prior, I guess, in relation to it being a newer company, I suppose, and maybe in the earlier stages of a community? Was there anything that stood out to you there?
From a community standpoint, yeah, a few things. One is just, in general, how similar a lot of sort of functional areas and professions are in terms of what they need and what they discuss and want to talk about around, finding a new job or starting a new job or a career. I mean, there's some differences, but in general, people who are in marketing or in HR or operations or product management, they have the same, similar questions, similar challenges, similar things they're excited to share their expertise on in terms of navigating, careers and workplaces. And that, basically everyone feels their career is nonlinear and unique, because it is, right? Like, we have this notion that sort of, I don't know, came from our grandparents' generation or something, that, this career is a linear thing. And yeah, maybe if you're in, sort of some industries and stay at, established companies for a long time, it can be sort of more linear, where you just kind of keep going to the next step after a few years. But most people, it's not like that. It's sort of, it only makes sense in hindsight, and you sort of jump around and change industries and change functions and types of companies and locations and all these things. So that was definitely something. Another thing is, I mean, this is a paid professional community, but people still want, there's still elements of fun and entertainment and delight and surprise that, I don't know, it wasn't surprising, but when we looked at, we've looked at other platforms, most of our interaction in community sort of engagement happens on Slack. And we looked at some other platforms, and it was interesting that the comments from our, some of our best users, many of whom are, super senior in their careers and experience, they said, well, this is interesting, but, Slack's more fun. This new platform doesn't have emojis, it doesn't have GIF reactions, which I love all those things, I agree with, but I was a little surprised to hear that coming from a sort of paid professional community. So I think, again, it goes back to that early Reddit thing of I don't know, we're all comfortable, for better or for worse, sort of having all these different things mix in our lives and what we see. And, having a silly reaction GIF or emoji on a very serious, career topic isn't, we can all handle that. We can all deal with it. There's no like basic contradiction that maybe, I don't know, people thought there would have been 10, 20 years ago. We're okay with our hard news being mixed with, cute sloth videos or whatever. So we've seen that again at Teal.
Yeah, that was a good point that Jesse brought up from Zapier. They said they had endless amounts of fun channels in Slack, completely unrelated to work. And yeah, I think you are right that depending on which platform you use, sometimes that doesn't carry over just in terms of like the structure. So yeah, I think that's actually a really important point to consider. And that kind of leads me on to my next question, which is, what are some of the main issues which you keep front of mind on growing and scaling a community, and how are you preparing for those in advance at Teal?
I think the biggest one is sort of retention. Like, I think the biggest competitor, we have at Teal or any other platform, really, the biggest, competitor you have is just entropy and sort of nothingness. It's just like, people, and when you talk to people that you're like, hey, that person was really engaged. They haven't been on in a while, and you talk with them either in a sort of serious research way or just casually, like, it's never this conscious decision that, well, the value proposition of the product, fell below my baseline of expectations, and so I'm not committing my time there. It's never that sort of like,
it's not binary.
Yeah, it's not binary. It's like, I got busy, or, oh, I don't know. So my
situation
schedule changed.
Right?
It's very human, and I, and sometimes, like, there's nothing, sometimes someone gets a really busy job and they have less free time, or they, that just happens. But it's usually just that entropy. You've got to keep having sort of new reasons to engage. You've got to keep adding value. You've got to keep surprising people. You've got to keep giving them stuff to look forward to. You've got to keep, sort of both repeating and evolving your mission and your values and your sort of reason for existing, because, the world, the universe is, the entropy is just happening 24/7. It never stops. It's relentless. Father time is undefeated. So I think that's something I always think about, and especially at Teal. It's
avoid
sort
the
of
heat death of the universe.
Heat death of the universe. Yeah, that's our biggest competitor, not whatever your other company. It's the heat death. We'll put that in our next investor deck. Competitors, heat death of the universe.
Yeah, here are some tactics on how we're avoiding the heat death of the universe. I like it.
But yeah, I think it's. I mean, and it's a Teal. Our vision is that it's something people have for years, for decades, until they retire or drop dead or whatever. And that's a little bit absurd for like a 1-year-old startup to have that, but that's kind of how we're thinking. And sort of the biggest, the thing that's most important to me, and I've seen with sort of some other communities, is do you make friends, or do you make meaningful connections? If whatever, something happened and Teal didn't exist tomorrow, have you met, as a user, have you met people that you would stay in contact with a month from now, a year from now? And I think if the answer is yes, then we're in a much better place to avoid the entropy, the heat death. And if the answer is no, then it's a lot easier for that person to get busy or find something else to spend their sort of creative career, ambitions in. It's really, the community aspect really, to me boils down to like, are you making meaningful connections, whatever that, that phrase is deliberately vague, but whatever that means to you, not just acquaintances, not just followers, but like people that you know on some level. Again, that means you've had repeated interactions. So that's something I think about. How do you, again, hopefully we're lucky enough to be around in a decade and it'll be interesting to see, but you're already starting to see, sometimes users will say like, oh, cool, Teal helped me navigate my job search this time. Hopefully I won't be doing it again anytime soon, but I'm already feeling a little more confident because I know the next time that happens, which is hopefully years from now, I'll already have this sort of support network, this infrastructure, this community that I know and they know me. And so I'm not going to feel as alone next time I have to do that. I know, I know the day after I, decide to start looking around or get an offer or get laid off, or there's another crazy world event and the, half the company's laid off, I know where I'm going to go. And I think that really helps. So it'd be interesting to see if we can actually, deliver on that 10 years from now, 2-3 jobs from now for our users. That's our goal.
Definitely. If this is like a slightly more specific question, but one that I think is going to be useful for people, and that's on the subject of communities which have, say, like a free tier, not like free tier. This could even be a space for people with like a free account or people who haven't signed up at all, but they can consume some content that the business is giving out for free compared to the paid tier. How do you balance trying to cater for both, and how would you like weigh that up in your like decision making day to day when it comes to either content or like initiatives, experiments, etc.?
It's a very good question, and I definitely don't have the feel like I have the right answers or enough right answers there. And it's something we're still navigating ourselves at Teal. I mean, we have a one a sort of a Slack community called Career Commons that's basically open if you want to create an account. That's like 3,000 people. It's pretty fairly engaged, and then we have one that's for sort of our premium members. Slack's a little bit different than sort of, it's not exactly, it's more communication and interaction than sort of content. And then we have a lot of content on our website that is sort of behind our membership wall, and a lot that's free. We have some tools. We have an awesome like Chrome plugin job tracker that's free. And yeah, finding that balance is tricky. I don't know, in terms of content, it's also tricky because, even if it's behind a membership sign up paywall, much less a sort of premium, only people here, the only people that are here and can read this have paid and given us their credit card information. And so by definition, it's a more intimate group. When people are talking about things they're navigating in their career, their jobs, it's, I don't know, people have different comfort levels. Some people are fine talking about, being laid off and unemployed or whatever, or looking for a new job on Twitter. Some people aren't even talking about it with their friends, and there's sort of everything in between. So I think it's also like, for something like that, it's important to help. There's not one answer, right? Like that you understand people have different comfort levels and different, you let them, you make it so they can discover the space they want. Maybe that's, a private channel with just a few people they know. So on Slack, we have lots of private channels that are set up by users with just group DMs. Maybe that's a semi-public channel, so I can get more feedback and more, hear from more people on a subject. Or maybe it's out in public and they're fine doing that, and they deliberately want that. I don't think there's one right answer, but I think it's not just like figuring out what's right for the business in terms of bringing in new people and marketing and sort of discovery, but it's also like what's right for the users that are posting and making sure they know, like you don't want them to be surprised about who can see or participate or view on this. So I think that's tricky. But we're going to be experimenting with some stuff over the next few months. So hopefully learn more about that. Yeah, please. Yeah, it's interesting. MakerPad is interesting in that, I think a lot of the stuff in your sort of circle community is publicly viewable, but then obviously you have to sign up to participate. And then, I don't know, I think that.
The last question was quite
Yeah.
selfish as well.
Yeah.
There's pretty before we start to wrap, I just wanted to ask you one more question on looking forward. So now the shift has happened where remote work has been sped up, Zoom, everyone's spending more time on Zoom. How are you thinking about the future of community building now that the majority of it is likely to be done online? We presume that there's going to be a much higher percentage of people working from home from now on, and also participating in online communities rather than purely offline, whereas I think that was the other side before. So I'm sure that meetups and events and things will come back in a big way, but I'm sure that there will be big online only communities here to stay. How are you kind of envisioning that future? And if you were to either like participate in something like that based off of like your interests, maybe like outside of working for Teal, let's say if you have like a particular interest around, I don't know, running, cycling, whatever, how are
Sure.
you envisioning those communities like forming in the next however many years? And have you got any like nice theories or ideas about how those would be interesting?
I kind of mentioned this early on that I'm a little skeptical of sort of offline online combos. I think in general, the people that most want to sort of marry offline and online communities are community managers and brands that want to put themselves in the middle of that. And I think for the most part,
Strategy
people like
purposes.
both are important. Like I think there's no replace for face to face. There's no replacement for meeting with people in your community, in your neighborhood, whatever. Going to events, but I just think they're different animals and people treat them differently. Um, at Reddit and with Depop and uh, we saw in other communities, at Reddit there was meetups, in the bigger cities, there's meetups in New York where I was at the time, there's meetups going on almost every day. There's over 30 Reddit meetup or a fitness Reddit meetup or just a local NYC meetup. They were all community organized. And I try to go as many of those as I could. And whenever I travel, I try to go to Reddit meetups when I go to a new city. Just it's a great way to meet people, and it's always interesting. A lot of the people there don't, they're not it's not the same people you see active in those local subreddits. It's almost never. And I've seen just in my own sort of like, extracurricular activities, whether it's, sort of sport, fitness related stuff, the people who are really active in the, in sort of the message board or the email list or whatever, there's some overlap, but there's usually not a lot of over. It's not, you can't necessarily predict who actually shows up every Wednesday night based on who's active on the boards. I think they're just different. They're different places in our lives. And yeah, if you have a group of friends or your, football team or, your friends from high school, then yeah, you can seamlessly move between offline and online. And, people have the context for both worlds. But in most cases, I think we just natural as humans to sort of have them separately. Maybe that'll change in the future once sort of the internet can be beamed to our retinas or whatever. But I think for the most part now, I just think there's so much just natural friction there. It just, I almost get, trying to force a connection when there's so much friction. So I always wonder, like, why are people trying to make that happen when, people can have great experience in both online and offline. And now sort of, yeah, in the pandemic, it's at least, cleaner in a way that, okay, we're now accepting everything's going to be online, at least for a while, and with some exceptions. So.
Nice. So we've got a couple of few more minutes to take any questions. So we've got one from Matthew. So if you've got anything you'd like to ask, far away in the Q&A tab. Matthew asks, do you tend to focus on LinkedIn? I think this is for Teal in particular. Do you tend to focus on LinkedIn or Twitter to build brand/community awareness, or both, or neither? What other channels do you use in your marketing funnel?
Sure. So yeah, we're pretty focused on both LinkedIn and Twitter. I think our members, you'll hear people talking about how Teal helped them, or how they're a member of Teal, or something they did on Teal or learned on Teal. You'll see that more on LinkedIn. But we sort of, are building our brand on both Twitter and LinkedIn. I would say Twitter's more, I don't know, we do, sort of LinkedIn Live and other sort of events, promote those on both channels. Sort of we definitely try to have a different voice on each one. But I'd say both of those are important. Other channels, I mean, definitely email, for sure. And then a lot of stuff, we do a lot of live events that are more of a marketing focus as well. Where we're trying to, add value and help answer questions people have and give them a taste of what it's like to sort of be a Teal member and what we're about. But they're open to, anyone that signs up. So those are probably the big ones for us.
Got it. Nice. I think that's probably a good spot to wrap. That was great. Loads of super actionable tips in there. And where can anybody find you online, yourself personally, or Teal, if they're interested in potentially looking at career related options and want to join the community?
Totally. Yeah. So I'm on Twitter, Huey Priest, on Twitter. And then Teal, it's just Teal, like the color, TEALHQ.com. You can check out our website. And also find links to, all our different social media things and events and stuff like that there. Also, again, we have an amazing job tracker that's a free Google Chrome plugin that's super useful if you're, looking for your next move. It just makes things a lot more organized and easier to kind of keep track of. And then, I'm on LinkedIn. I try to have fun on LinkedIn and make that network a little less dry. So that's a warning, but you can find me on LinkedIn. If I can help with anything, I'm glad to, if I can be helpful for people navigating career stuff or job search, I'm always glad to do that on any of those platforms.
Amazing. Everyone, I'll make sure I add these links onto the community thread within the Circle community as well. So you've got those in there, and also the recording of this will be up straight away if you want to watch this back. But Erik, thank you very much for your time. Very generous. Thanks for sharing everything with us. That's really useful. Make sure you could reach out and connect with you on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
Thanks
for everything MakerPad has done. Definitely learned a lot and can continue to check in on the community and everything you all do. It's super helpful for, we use a lot of no-code stuff ourselves for Teal, and when I was at, even when I was at Nike, it's been super useful. So appreciate you and the community as well.
Yeah, I've seen behind the curtain some of your processes through Dave. He's a automation Airtable Webflow whiz. So I think we should probably do another session with him. He's got some really good stuff going on there.
We're on Bubble now. Just rolled that out. So
nice. Yeah. Awesome. Let's get it booked in.
Okay.
Thanks again, Erik.
All right.
Speak soon. Thanks, everyone.